Good morning, everyone. Welcome. A snowy, finally snowy January morning in Michigan. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Steve Simpson. I currently serve as the Chief Strategy Officer for the college, and I work in the Institutional Effectiveness Department, and I currently have the great honor to serve as the chair for our Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Justice Committee. And I'd just like to extend a thank you to all of you for being here this morning. Today's presentation, today's event is the culmination of a week that we've spent as a college in reflection, in thinking and conversation about the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But while we've tackled some difficult issues, what I'd really like to do is set aside this morning for the celebration of his life and his legacy, and to take time to recognize our peers and our colleagues from across the entire OCC system, and really spend the morning in celebration and recognition. It would be customary in a non-pandemic time that we would begin this presentation by standing together and singing together James Weldon Johnson's Lift Every Voice and Sing. Obviously, because of the current health conditions, we are unable to do so. But what we'd like to do is try and give us as much normalcy as we can. And so we've made arrangements for one of our colleagues, Michelle May, to perform this song for us. And though we can't be together, we can't sing together this morning, we can all take some time and reflect on the message of this song and reflect on the meaning of the day. So with that said, please join me in welcoming Michelle May as she performs Lift Every Voice and Sing. Thank you so much, Michelle. When we were originally looking for somebody who could bring that to us, Michelle jumped at the opportunity, and we're very grateful for her for sharing her art with us this morning. I see a couple of you are doing it. Please feel free as we move through the day to use the chat. Ken and I will be monitoring that, but it's also a way where we can applaud to give thanks to the many presenters we're going to have today. I think starting with song is a great way to start a day of celebration. And as we'll see as we move through it, we're going to see the connection of art and the importance of art and expression into helping us deal with some of these very complicated issues we're facing. So we thank Michelle for that. What I'd like to do now is introduce our Chancellor, Peter Provenzano. Peter is going to share some remarks marking the day, and he will also be helping us recognize our 2020 and 2021 diversity champions. Peter?
Thank you, Steve, and welcome everyone to OCC's Convocation, celebrating the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King. I wish we could be meeting like this in person, but I'm just so grateful for the opportunity to meet with you on Zoom. In this time of continued change and uncertainty, I'm so proud of our entire college community who remains unwavering in our commitment to the values that we hold dear here at OCC and how we live those values each and every day. Among these, we value our freedom to express ideas and engage in conversations that impact our community, including this week's panel discussions, student forums, and hosting great speakers like Dr. Rita Fields, who you will hear from very shortly. Among Dr. King's most powerful quotes and insights, this one is one of my favorites. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Across our great country, we are living in a time of continued uncertainty. With the light of optimism and opportunity, we look forward with tremendous hope for healing and change in our community. Together, we're making a difference by listening, learning, and empowering each other. This is how we live each day at OCC. We're recognizing our differences with respect, understanding, hope, and action. Now, I'd like to introduce some of the incredible individuals at OCC who are championing these core values. These individuals have been nominated by their colleagues for embodying and serving as the conscience of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice here at OCC. Also being an advocate who speaks out and a doer whose actions speak of respect for others, and an individual who does not settle for the status quo with their influence and impact for change. And so the nominees for the 2020 and 2021 Diversity Champion are Anthony Thomas, counseling faculty member at our Orchard Ridge campus. Beverly Brown, Director of Secondary Partnerships. Beverly Stanborough, Dean of College Readiness. Bill Konkoleski, Academic Support Center Paraprofessional at our Southfield campus. Cheryl Neely, Sociology faculty member at Royal Oak. David Cece, Dean of Public Safety and Director of Law Enforcement Training. David Dell, OCC Public Safety Officer at Auburn Hills. Edward Bowie, Custodian at Auburn Hills. Eleonora Baglatelia, Director of Global Education. Quincy Norwood, English faculty at the Southfield campus. Russ Davis, one of our amazing OCC students. And Suba Subaro, English faculty member at Auburn Hills campus. Please join me in a warm virtual round of applause for each of these incredible individuals. And now I'm pleased to recognize the following two individuals who have stood out among this incredible list and were selected by the college's DEIJ committee as our diversity champions. OCC's 2020 diversity champion is Bill Konkoleski, Academic Support Center Paraprofessional, Southfield campus. Bill was nominated by Allison McFadden Kiesling and Mary Kay Clancy. He's been with the college for 18 years and is the longest standing member of OCC's Committee on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Justice. Bill's also known for his consistent work in initiating, facilitating, and keeping our OCC community well informed on a variety of DEIJ events around the college. He's quick to recognize and praise the efforts of his colleagues and works continuously to promote DEIJ across Oakland Community College and raises issues of concern to leadership's attention whenever possible. Please join me in congratulating Bill. And now for the OCC's 2021 Diversity Champion, I'm pleased to recognize Dean of College Readiness, Beverly Stanborough. Beverly was nominated by Nairine Atkinson and Dean Cindy Carbone. Beverly has been with OCC for 33 years. For those of you who have worked with Bev, you know she has never wavered from her stance of putting students first, and she works tirelessly on behalf of our students on committees, college initiatives, and within her own academic area. She's always been committed to ensuring consistent best practices, and she adheres to college-wide initiatives, all in the name of student success. Dean Stanborough is one of the strongest advocates for incoming students and focuses on how the college can empower every student that reaches our campuses, and she embodies our mission to empower excellence. Please join me in congratulating Dean Beverly Stanborough. How about a round of applause for our two winners? Thank you, and warmest congratulations to our nominees and our winners. And now I'd like to turn it back over to Steve Simpson.
Thank you, Peter, and congratulations to the winners. Having worked closely with both of those folks, very well deserved. And so unfortunately, you can't hear thunderous applause, but I'm sure from in our homes, we're all clapping wildly, and everyone is very appreciative of your work and what you do above and beyond every day. Before we get to some of the presentations of today, I'd be remiss and need to be reminded to do thank yous. While I'm here speaking to all of you, there is an entire army of people behind the scenes that really helped to pull this together. As I said at the beginning, I'm here representing our College Committee for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Justice. And our mission is to ensure that diversity in all its forms is respected, valued by fostering and promoting an environment of inclusiveness. And so I'd just like to pull their names up for you. There are many to read, but having only been here a short period of time, and in an even shorter period of time working with this group of individuals, I can't thank them enough for what they do. These types of events, the movement that we have around social justice, the movement that we have around equity, broadly, not just about race and ethnicity, but broadly, is something that's essential to the health of a college. And without these people who volunteer their time, their expertise, their effort, in addition to everything else that they have going, it would be very hard to maintain this movement. And so just a very heartfelt thank you to all of you for everything that you do. And if I can take a quick sidestep and do a shameless plug, this is the work of a community, and our committee is open. And so if you are someone that has an interest in this work and you are wondering for a way to contribute, that there are similar committees on each campus, and there are always room for like-minded, motivated individuals in our ranks. And so, coming out of this event, if you'd like to join us in this year's coming body of work, we would be very open to having you. So just a little plug there. We can always use more help. Specific to today, and as we kind of transition, I wanted to also do a round of thank yous. As I said at the beginning, because we couldn't be together, we talked a lot about what to do to mark the occasion. And in our conversation, we had so many good ideas, and to really impress the gravity of the holiday and what it represents for our country. And in light of everything that's happened in our country this year, this group of individuals really wanted to pull together a week of events. And so we had a great chance to see and treat these issues from a bunch of different perspectives, right? We had a chance through our panel discussion to talk about this as it relates to criminal justice and health and mental health and education, and how do those different disciplines work together. And so we had a really engaging discussion there. We had our partners at the Detroit Institute of Arts join us for, really talking about art and representations of these issues in art, and give us a chance to internalize and reflect on some of those things through art, which was a very powerful presentation. I had a chance yesterday to attend a professional development put on by Dr. Alfred DeFries. And one thing that struck me is he brought a historical perspective to it, right? He took us back to the 50s and 60s and the height of the civil rights movement. And one thing that stuck with me is in his presentation, he was kind of discussing the differences in need between the North and the South. And in talking about the South, he was sharing some quotes and sharing some video that reminded us that there was, at that time, this really explicit threat. There was violence and police and dogs and that imagery and the sort of visceral nature of that threat. But then he also was playing some quotes from a video of Dr. King, and he was talking about the challenges in the North and sort of the unseen types of challenges that we have. And what struck me was so much of what was said in that presentation from the 60s is still relevant today. And I think it was just a really important reminder that as we close today, there's still work to be done. So I want to thank him for sharing his expertise with us. Our Black Student Union had a great presentation, really talking about the perspective of students and emerging leaders and how these issues affect how they see the world and how they see their potential leadership in this very complicated world. And last but not least, I wanted to thank Ashley Larkin, our new head of the Oakland Early College, for helping us coordinate with our great student speakers who you'll hear from in just a moment. But I would be remiss if I didn't also recognize two groups who worked to kind of really execute the events of today. Our DEIJ committee, Champions Committee, Rachel, Kim, Donna, and Candy, really pulled together 2 years of work in a month. Because of COVID, we weren't able to have a recognition last year, and so they did a lot of work headed into the holiday to help make that happen and to help us recognize those champions. And then also Ken Falk, who is the driving force behind all of the logistics. Everything that you're doing is nothing. I just show up and talk, which is as per usual for those of you that know me. But Ken is really the one who coordinated the events, who handled all the logistics, who coordinated the technology. And I just can't thank Ken enough for all his help. Without him, this would not have been possible today. So there are probably more people. I thank you all for your work and for helping us bring this morning to life. So with that said, one of the things that Dr. DeFries also talked about in his professional development was that we tend to sometimes treat issues of race as adults as adult issues. And I think one of the things that really resonated me from what he said was, these issues, the effect of some of the racism we still see in our country, it starts early, and it affects our children, and it affects our younger generation. And so I think, part of this has always been to engage those younger people in conversation. But today what I'd like to do is let them teach us a little bit, and in their own words and through the expression of their art, I'd like to let them engage us in a little bit of education. I think it's so important that we hear their voices as emerging leaders. So I'd like to thank Adedoyan, Kylie, and Elijah for sharing your thoughts and your art with us this morning. And I will let you do that in your own words and be quiet. So thank you.
Hello, my name is Adedoyan Adebayo, and the name of my poem is Remember One. The young man could choose to go the easy path, which had led to his punishment, or he could diverge from the harmful path and lift others up with him. When he chose the second option, he did not choose himself. He chose his entire community and mentored one little girl especially. And on the day he was murdered by vultures who had waited patiently to watch him fail under their pecks, as his breath escaped him, the entire community mourned in unity. But then it seemed like only the little girl remembered his gentleness, while the rest turned to celebrate vultures who would surely come for them next. This story is as old as our nation, but I believe there will be a day where many agree that it seems like an urban legend. Now, time for a real story. Not like the one I told was entirely fiction. 50-something short years ago, King revealed a dream that required us all to continue the seemingly perpetual fight against America's past and its resistance to being America for all people. To discover a way in which we all get treated as Americans in a promised land where racial and ethnic discrimination, the denial and delay of justice, and losing compassion to defend the undefendable while blaming God for one's unempathetic spirit and murder by the state are all unacceptable. And people defend and live peacefully with each other. Yet the annoyance of being told, be patient for a future that will never exist. And the scum of whataboutism persists to threaten our sanity. And no one is spared. Even those who cheer for vultures are mourned publicly when they suffer under them. Our realities will not be ignored, and our lives must not be wasted waiting for a future generation to do the work that was inherited by us. Wasted naively believing the work was already completed for us. Wasted not taking the time to at least vote, or at least to encourage those who are eligible. As if the future of America does not depend on it, because Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream depends on it. Because 50-something years ago is not that many centuries ago. And so we really shouldn't be surprised, just disappointed. And it would be a shame to forget King's words, or worse, to dilute them. He was known as a radical threat in his day. What about ours? Is his vision too much for you or for me? Surely he is a beacon of hope who inspires us to realize his dream, for our children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great, and so on and so forth, to defend it, not only claiming love in our hearts, but remembering it legitimately and radically freeing ourselves of vultures without becoming one, or tearfully telling children how to avoid death once they leave their parents' gaze. Waking up to a dream that is no longer improbable, but is alive and well.
Every year on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, I am reminded of the great level of perseverance that Dr. King had, and I use it as a reference and strength to get through my everyday life. Now, we all have those days when we may feel like things just aren't working out in our favor, or we're not feeling it, as some might say. But it is on days like that that I remind myself that Dr. King also experienced that, and if he could get through it, then so can I. I often look at other people's lives and what they have been through, such as Dr. King, not to equate myself with them, but to use it as inspiration to keep moving forward. On this day, I think about what Dr. King not only persevered through, but how he made a difference in the process. He stood against the odds and made his voice heard no matter what other people thought. One of my favorite quotes from Dr. King is, "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands in moments of challenge and controversy." Dr. King also spoke up for those who did not have a voice. Despite everything going on around him and his current circumstances, Dr. King made the best of it and worked tirelessly to make this world a better place for all of us. In times like these, when I am not sure what will happen next, I, a young Black woman in America, aspire to do the same. During his famous I Have a Dream speech, Dr. King stated, "We cannot walk alone, and as we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall walk ahead. We cannot turn back." Although times have changed and things have gotten much better, I believe that we still have a while longer to go. I think a way to do that is through community building and unity. Divisive people and acts are all around us in today's society, but people coming together rather than pulling apart can make a big difference, and we may make this world a better place for all of us. Even simple acts of kindness such as greeting your coworker or complimenting your classmate can make a person's day, and maybe that person will pay it forward and compliment or greet someone else. As Dr. King once said, darkness cannot push out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. Today, I leave you with this. If you get one thing from this afternoon, I hope it is the reminder that you, no matter who you are, can always make a difference and change the world. So today, as we honor Dr. King and his legacy, ask yourself, what can I do to make a difference? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Elijah Devine, and I have the privilege of speaking to you today during the Martin Luther King Convocation. While thinking about what I could offer you today, I decided I would share a children's book that I wrote and illustrated last year. I believe the message in this story aligns well with the message we could all benefit from hearing today while we remember Martin Luther King Jr., which is we need kindness and love in our lives as a society. Can we be friends based on a true story? There was a boy named Elijah. He was his mother's only son, but he started a new school and feared that he would be different from everyone. He wasn't the strongest. He felt that he couldn't fit in and would always lose instead of win. He wasn't the fastest, he wasn't the smartest, and he wasn't the most noticed. Elijah had a skin condition where his skin broke out before it was supposed to, and he felt so bad that through a mirror he wouldn't look into. He was good at some things, better than most would ever know. He could really use a friend. Through the halls and out from school, no one thought Elijah was cool. He had talent, but he thought that's all he could do. He didn't have any friends, and to him that was sad. And when Jack and his buddies would bully him, it always made him mad. Then one day, a stranger came to help, and it made Elijah glad. The stranger helped him up and gave him a smile and told Elijah that he had been watching him for a while. The stranger told Jack it was wrong to bully others, and Jack apologized to Elijah, saying that he gets the same from his older brother. Then Jack said to everyone, we should be nice and start brand new. And a girl came up to Elijah and said she likes the pictures he drew. Then a boy comes up to him and says he likes them too. The kids started to scream out that they wanted their pictures drawn, as many as 5 to 10. Then Elijah started to draw so many pictures he thought they'd never end. And when Elijah's mother came to pick him up later in the day, he says, look, Mom, I made new friends. As I read this book, I, and hopefully you as well, would think that MLK would like the stranger in this story. I think he would be proud that he had a voice to speak up for Elijah, even if Elijah didn't have one of his own. I think MLK would agree that if more people like the stranger and less like Jack, the bully, we would be more unified and accepting of people in our society today. And I would like to remind you of those who are listening, in the words of MLK himself, the time is always right to do what is right. Thank you.
Thank you. After many years of doing this and many years of working with young people, it still catches me and it still surprises me the depth of their insight, the depth of their talent, and an often overlooked resource that we have. And so as I hear from young people, as I hear from our next generation of leaders, of advocates who will carry this work forward, I think it is a way that we can feel very hopeful. And so I really want to thank Adedoyin, Kylie, and Elijah for sharing their thoughts with us, but also their art. Just truly impressive. So thank you all. So please join me in giving them a virtual round of applause in the chat or with your hands. Thank you. So what we'd like to do now is introduce our keynote speaker. And I know that she plans to kind of share her story with you as part of this, so I will be very brief in my introduction. But I did want to introduce Dr. Rita Fields. Dr. Fields currently serves as the Chief Talent and Strategy Officer for Lighthouse Michigan. She's a dual CEO for both 313 Industries and Copper Phoenix Consulting. Dr. Fields is a faculty member in the School of Management at the University of Michigan, Healthcare Administration at Central Michigan, and dissertation advisor for the PhD program at Assumption University in Bangkok, Thailand. Dr. Fields is a SHRM certified senior professional of human resources and a lifetime member of the National Association of African Americans in Human Resources. And she currently serves as the spokeswoman for the Center for the Education of Women at the University of Michigan and as a member of EDA University Center for Regional Economic Innovation at the Michigan State Center for Community and Economic Development. We are very lucky to have her and very thankful for her being here. And so with that said, I'd like to introduce Dr. Rita Fields. Dr. Fields.
Good morning. I am absolutely delighted to be here with you and for such an auspicious occasion. And I also have to say, I put my little note in the chat, but please, if the students are not on board here in this room, we have quite a few people here, please extend to them how much I thought that their words and expressions were so incredibly beautiful. It was a lovely way to come in. I was enthralled by that book, I must tell you. So we are here to honor and acknowledge the role of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I agree with everyone who preceded me that he was a magnificent individual. And he was so incredibly important in so many ways. And there's so many different things that we hear about him when we hear about individuals talking about his life. And I took some time to think about it before today. And I think that one of the things that we've not heard quite as much about is the fact that he suffered very much. And so I'd like to take that, that thought and expand on that for my remarks this morning. I'd like to talk about the beauty and the opportunity to find purpose while in the midst of pain. So I'll do that. I think that suffering is normal. And for whatever reason in our society, it is not talked about quite as much. When you hear about people who are successful in any way, we don't hear very often about the struggles for them to get to where they are. We hear about where they are, and it almost gives the impression as though you can just wake up one day and decide to do great and then be great. William Shakespeare had a quote that said that some are born great, some achieve greatness, and some have greatness thrust upon them. And oh, that sounds so great. But the reality is that if we're being honest, whether we personally feel successful or not, I suspect that the common thread in all of our stories is the fact that we have experienced suffering. And I also find it to be disturbing, frankly, that so many individuals dismiss the importance of feeling as though you're in a place that you may not get out of. There are ways to mask that. There are ways to camouflage that. There are ways to numb ourselves to that. And so many of us engage in those things, as opposed to viewing it as an opportunity for us to get to know a lens of ourselves that aside from and outside from that suffering, we may never know. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that. I think that I'm going to tell a little bit of my story, very condensed. I'm not quite sure who's in the room, but some of you may know a great deal of my story. But for those who don't, I was born in Detroit. I'm a Detroit girl. And I was born to a woman who is mentally ill. And that was devastating on her children. And being one of them, I remember a lifetime of memories of how difficult it was to navigate that. When you're connected to someone who's mentally ill and they happen to be your parents, it's very difficult because as a child, you don't understand nuance, you don't understand context, you don't understand the bigger picture. Those are very much adult concepts. And so when you're a kid, you just sort of want to have a mom and or dad or a sister or a brother. And so it was a very, very difficult time for me. And that impacted me dramatically I would equate that time as being a time of suffering very much in my life. And so suffering is interesting because it's painful and it can propel you into places that you had not anticipated. And my suffering actually caused me to run away from home. I was 17 years old and I was supposed to register for my last year of high school, which is normally like a cool time, I would imagine, right? You're about to be done with high school. Who doesn't remember that, right? Some of you might have just had that experience last year. And instead of doing that, I ran away. I got on a bus and I went to the house of this guy that I did not know, and started this life with him. And I'll skip over all of those things and get to the point that ultimately I ended up being homeless, and not homeless as in couch surfing, because I understand and recognize there are quite a few people literally don't have a place to stay, but they're able to stay at the home of a friend. I literally had no friends and I was on the street. And so that was one of the pivotal periods in my life. I've heard people refer to 2020 as being an awful year. In many ways, it was absolutely an awful year for me too. It was paradoxical in that there was some amazing things that happened last year for me also, but 2020 is nowhere close to being my worst year, not even close. And so that time in my life was definitely one of the toughest. And eventually I gave birth to my child, who is 29 years old. And if we were together, I would ask you I would pause and see if there were any looks of shock on anyone's face that I could possibly have a 29-year-old. I'm just going to assume that there's lots of shocked looks, and thank you for that acknowledgement, and move on. But he's 29, and that after I had him, I had a lot of decisions. I was on welfare, which is not a great place to be. I never thought that. I understood the necessity of it. I literally had no other options, and I had a newborn child. And so I did what I needed to do, and I got on welfare, and I commenced to trying to figure out what I should do with what appeared to be the shards of this completely decimated existence. And I decided that I needed to go back to school. That was pretty much the first thing that I needed to do. And so I called my worker and I told her that I had planned to go back to school. And, you know, I don't know what I was thinking at the time. I can't remember, but I remember thinking that I would get some type of atta-girl because of that. Like, hey, yeah, you know, we're on the same team. My goal is to get off of the system, so I'm going to go back to school. And so I said, you know, I don't have any money, so I'm going to need some bus tickets to catch the bus to go to school. And she paused and she told me that she did not have bus tickets for me. And I said, but you do give bus tickets out. Don't you give bus tickets out for other things? Why wouldn't you give bus tickets out for me to go to school? And she said, they don't do that. And I was shocked because I thought, hey, I thought we were on the same team. Why wouldn't you want me to go to school? For briefly, I experienced incredible disappointment. I mean, it was overwhelming because I thought, I'm willing to go, but how would I do it? And then I started to get angry. And I took some time and I thought about it and I said, okay, fine. If she won't give me bus tickets, then I'll find a way to go myself. I didn't have the latitude, even though I was on welfare. All of my money went to my mother. And so I didn't have an extra $20 a week hanging around, which seems as though it's nothing. But when you actually have nothing, that's actually pretty significant. And so I put my son in his stroller and I took him for a walk. And I remember seeing a bottle on the ground. And I said, you know what? I'm going to find my own bus fare. And like literally, I would go and look for bottles while I was walking my son. I was always a multitasker. Even now, if you noticed in my bio, I always have a lot of things going on. And I would gather enough bottles for that day's bus fare. And I would cash them in and I would catch the bus to go back to finish my high school education. And I did that for several weeks, and it was tough. And I suffered during that time. It was very difficult, but it allowed me to focus on whether or not I actually really wanted to do this. And I realized that I did, and that I needed to, and that I needed to find a way. And so I did it. Eventually, my worker called me back and she said that she found bus tickets, amazingly. I'm a Christian, so I believe that God made her find me bus tickets. And then it was less hard, but I recognized in myself the willingness to push past that disappointment and to still focus on what it was that I needed to do. And it was almost like I sort of gave myself that atta girl that I had been looking for from my worker. So that was really pivotal for me, because at that time I didn't have any goals. You know, goals are dreaming about the future, having goals, having vision boards. That's the stuff of luxury for people who don't have to worry about survival. So that was inconsistent with my reality. And so I didn't have those things. So when I started to go to school, I realized maybe I should have one or two. And my first goal was to get off of welfare. I just thought that it was very dehumanizing, the way that I would be treated. And I wanted my son to be able to look up to me being someone who tried with everything in her. And so that was really important to me. So that was a goal. Well, a couple years in, a little less than that, just past my first year, I get a call from my worker one day, and guess what? I was getting cut off. I won't get into the complexity of why, but the bottom line was I was in school and I was no longer eligible. And I remember being in a stairwell. I was in between classes and I cried because I was terrified. Now, let me say this. Fear is interesting, and fear is incredibly motivating if you allow it to go unchecked in your life. And so I cried like a baby. I didn't know what to do. I was in a panic. And then I stopped crying and remembered that I had this goal of one day not being on welfare, and that even though it was very difficult, this is actually what I wanted. It wasn't the way I planned it. It wasn't in the time that I thought it would happen, but it was happening. And it still hurt. I was still very, very nervous about it. But I said, you know what, I'll figure it out. I will have to figure it out because I have this small person that's getting bigger every day, and I'm in school. So let's just keep moving. And eventually I graduated. Ultimately, before I graduated, I had one more goal because I had completed that first one. So I figured I would add another. And the second goal was to graduate before my son went to kindergarten, which meant that I would have to graduate in 4 years, which many of you may know is now a thing of the past. It's become increasingly difficult to do that over time. And back then it was tough to do it. I had a double major, and so I had extra classes, but I was determined. I want to be out of school before he starts. And I did some things to do that. I took a lot of classes. I'm not going to get into how much because I don't want someone to copy that without understanding your capacity. Let's just say I broke a record at Marygrove. But I ended up graduating in 4 years, and I got out the spring before my son went into kindergarten. And I have this picture on my graduation day, and he is absolutely exuberant. You would think he got the degree. And I'm just standing there with this look on my face. I'm happy, but I'm sort of shell-shocked, like, okay, now what, right? I had completed my high school diploma the entire year in 2 months. Because I took classes around the clock, and then I immediately went into college, and I had gotten out of college in 4 years. And so that entire period of time was so incredibly impactful for me, and it was very anxiety producing. And so I'm a professor, and I have students who have a lot of anxiety. And I have to admit, I've been teaching for about 11 years. That's long enough. And when I was younger, it wasn't, people didn't talk about having anxiety. Like, I don't ever remember hearing that. I had some serious anxiety, y'all, okay? Because, I mean, come on, you don't even know the rest of my story, but it was really, really rough being a single mother and having this baby and having a difficult home life and not having a lot of support and not having money and trying to figure things out. And so that entire time was a time of intense anxiety for me. And I remember trying to be very deliberate in how I manifested that so that I would not pass that to my child. I took mothering very seriously. And I wanted to be a safe place for him because I did not have that when I was younger. And so I finished that and I got out of school. And once you finish school, this is something else they don't really tell you about. You sort of freak out because you don't know what to do. And when you have gone to school, like, 365 days a year, not really, but it seems like it, right? And you get out, it's very like alarming to try to figure out what it is you're supposed to do with the rest of your life. And so I felt that same way. I also still had the residue of my struggle. So even though I was self-sustaining economically, I had a job. I did not have a lot of money. I had enough for us to scrape by, which was fine for me. Anything was better than eating out of the garbage can again. So everything is relative. And so that was okay. But I didn't know how to drive. So that seems weird. I graduated at 22. I did not know how to drive. And the reason why I didn't know how to drive is because people typically learn that when they're in high school, like or they used to. Now I don't know what y'all do. But it used to be that when you went to high school during the summer, you would learn how to drive. And I could not do that because my mother wouldn't allow me to do that. She required that we work and that we work the entire summer and then we give her the money. And that was just the way that it was. There was no discussion, there was no negotiating, there's none of that. And so I never learned how to drive. And so I found myself in a situation where I had a degree, and I had the opportunity to get jobs. I'd done well in school, even with my double major. I graduated cum laude at that point, which I considered to be summa cum laude with a baby and a double major. And so I was ready for the workforce, but I didn't have a car. And so for 2 years, I had to make enough money to pay for private kindergarten for my child, because at the time, you could not go to full day kindergarten unless you had developmental challenges. And I needed full day care for my son. So I actually had to pay for private kindergarten, which to me is an oxymoron, but okay, I did that. And so I had to make enough money to do that. Well, the jobs that paid me enough money to pay the minimum amount of all my bills and to pay for that private kindergarten were nowhere near me. So it turned out that I ended up having to catch 9 buses a day for 2 years. I caught 4 in the morning every day, well, 5 days a week. And I had to drop my son off. And then I caught 5 on the way home because by the end of the day, it would take me 3 hours to get to work and to come home from work. It was incredible. I would get up at like 4 in the morning. I don't even know how I did it. I felt like a zombie, but at the end of the day, I could not walk that last half mile. So I literally would just sit there and wait for the bus to come. And that's what made it 5 at night. And I did that for 2 years because I had to. And so even though this was incredibly, I got sick because I was exposed to the elements so much, but I did not have a choice. And I remembered coming to the realization, I would talk to myself a lot, which sounds interesting. I still talk to myself quite a bit, but I would remind myself of where I come from. I'd remind myself that I was strong because I was able to do it. So I would pat myself on the back, that atta girl thing. I continued to do that for myself, and it motivated me to continue to keep going. I think that is so incredibly important. And I have lived a life, I will tell you, that has largely been marked by a lot of suffering. At this point, that has changed for me. I have so different of a life than I had in the beginning. I can't even tell you, and I can't dwell too much on it because I don't want to cry. I'm blessed, I'm healthy, and I'm so grateful for what I went through because I was present. And being present when you're experiencing hardship is hard because it's uncomfortable. It's really uncomfortable. And sometimes, there were many times when I felt as though it was never going to get any better. It just wasn't. And what does that mean when you feel that? Does that mean that does that mean, okay, now I can just sit down and just quit? Or does that mean that I have to keep going, even though I don't see the possibility of it getting better? And for me, it was a conscious choice to continue. That is so incredibly important. The level of conscientiousness and intentionality that I felt in that time, and I still feel today, it really prepared me to live a life, to continue to do that. That even though there were times when I wished I were numb, I could not give up. I had a child, and I wanted to be an example for him of what possibility could do. So I kept moving. And I'm so grateful I did, because I learned a Rita in that aside from that, I would not know who's still here. We're the sum total of all of our experiences, the good ones, the not so good ones, the funny ones, the ones that only we know about, and a willingness to be able to just be, even though it's hard, even though people don't understand you, even though you don't understand what's happening in the world. I am staring in the camera. You feel me? It's so important because we have to be here. And there are people who are connected to us, whether you acknowledge it or not, who need you to be here and to be engaged, and they need you to see them. And you can't see other people if you don't see yourself, and if you're not honest with yourself. In my time as a homeless person, the worst thing that happened to me was being consistently reminded that people could choose whether or not I was even there. People just wouldn't even look at me. They wouldn't make eye contact with me. The most dehumanizing thing I've ever experienced in my life is for someone to purposefully not see me. And so I think it's really important when we consider all that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. did, that we see him in totality and that we honor him by seeing whomever is around us. I believe that we uniquely have people placed around us that we're uniquely able to impact, either negatively or positively. And we can work to make sure that that is positively. That is so important. And if you don't hear anything else from what I said, please understand that. I had a friend once who told me that she gave me an analogy. She's a brilliant woman, Dr. Gail Parker. And she said that most people, when they're walking through life, and let's just say theoretically that we're barefoot and that we step on a nail, right, with our bare feet. She said that most people, there's only two responses, or there's two typical responses. One is to scream in pain and then continue to walk somewhere with a limp. You don't pull it out, but you want to go somewhere and walk with a limp. You still have to continue to where you go. You don't want to hurt anymore, so you don't pull the pain out. The other reaction is to look at it, to recognize the fact that you're in extreme pain, and then to pull the nail out, which is going to cause even more pain. But in that action allows your body to at least start to heal. In the previous reaction, okay, you avoided some additional pain, but you still have the initial pain that you had. And ultimately, you're going to become infected. Your foot may have gangrene. You're going to walk with a limp. Your entire body will accommodate the fact that you have a nail in your foot. And so you can't actually walk the way you're supposed to walk. And so she told me this, and she said that as much as possible, I should always remember that I have a choice. That resonated so deeply with me, because sometimes we step on nails, and it would be so much better just to pretend like it didn't really happen, or to call it something else. Or when you see someone else who's walking with a limp, to not acknowledge there's a pain, there's a nail in their foot. It might even be through their foot, but to pretend as though, well, maybe you, I don't know, had a cold, or maybe your immune system's down. Perhaps you should try deep breathing, when there's an obvious nail in their foot, right? And I think that the commitment to honesty when one is in deep struggle is so incredibly liberating, and is one of the most beautiful things that you can do for other people when they're in pain, to recognize the nail. Incredibly important. I will end with a couple thoughts here. My mother passed away a month ago today, and it was very difficult for me for a lot of reasons. The challenge with having the passing of a parent who's been mentally ill and abusive is that it's not like other types of mourning. Typically, when I've experienced the loss of people in my life, unfortunately in 2020, I lost 4 friends in addition to my mother dying. I am racked with memories and I miss them, and it's this wonderful thing. It's a bit different when the scenario is abusive. And I was thinking about how grief is interesting, and how when you enter grief, or you enter any type of painful journey, you enter standing, and you're used to standing, but at some point the grief or the pain will drop you to your knees, and you have to become content with having to crawl. Now, what's interesting about that is that you see different things when you crawl than when you stand. And I think anyone who has been with a baby knows that, right? So the baby's pretty short, but they crawl, and then they're half their size. And if you, at your height, don't pay attention to what the baby could find when they're crawling, and they're only 6 inches off the floor, there's going to be some problems, right? So you run into stuff when you're in this period where you can only crawl that you don't encounter when you're standing. And it is both horrifying and liberating and beautiful, in that if you weren't in that position, you'd not see it. And so one of the major blessings that I've gotten out of this time in processing my mother's death is that I've seen the product of that pain manifest into a beautiful flower. And because I lived a certain way as a child, I was incredibly deliberate with my son. He had this amazing life. I mean, like, my son had a great life. We did not have a lot of money. He didn't have a lot of physical stuff, but he had a mother. Do you know that I made up a sitcom for this kid? Like, literally every day on the way to school, it was the Alaric show. And I even did canned laughter. I mean, it was crazy. I told him stories. I spent time with him. I told him how much I loved him. So even though that, if I hadn't experienced the pain that I had felt as a child, I wouldn't have recognized how important that is. And so I did that for my son. My son had a baby in 2020. I told you, some horrible things and some wonderful things. She was born in the same month I was born. And she is magnificent. Oh my God. Oh, I didn't even want to be called a grandmother. I just could not. It was just, it was like a 4-letter word. I was like, I'm too young. This is ridiculous. I am in love with that baby. And my son is already in love with her. And I watch him with her and how he drenches her with this affection and how she's surrounded with people who love her and who tell her she's beautiful and who aren't trying to hurt her or who basically just have the capacity to love her. And I'm so grateful that I can barely speak. I can't tell you. So pain can lead to purpose. It can lead to an exploration of ability that you did not know that you possessed. I encourage you deeply when you consider all of the suffering that not only Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. experienced, but so many people have experienced in both the civil rights struggle, who are currently experiencing in the times that we have today. I encourage you to never choose to not see people. I encourage you to never diminish pain that people experience and express. Even if you don't understand it, it does not mean it's not valid. And I encourage you wherever possible personally to recognize when you go through moments that are very hard, very intense, that there could be something in this that you would not have gotten had it not been for this scenario. And you can choose to look for that. I am a believer. For someone who is as far away from eating out of the garbage can as beyond what she could have even imagined for herself, I cannot tell you how important it is to choose how you interpret your life, and that's your choice. And people will try to do it for you, but you don't have to let them. You can choose to live the life that you want. I don't want to leave without expressing yet again how important it is to not diminish the suffering of others and to recognize the opportunity when you have to experience that yourself, and wherever possible to go through it, to not mask it or numb it or pretend as though it's not there. There's no learning in that. To remove that nail from your foot. And if at all possible, which is another thing that I commit to do personally, to try your very best to recognize when people are walking with a limp and do whatever you can to encourage them to remove their nails too. And that's it. I thank you so much for listening to me. I hope that I said something that was valuable to you, and I'm assuming we're going to perhaps go to Q&A.
Yeah, on behalf of everyone, I want to thank you so much for being here today and sharing that very powerful story with us. I know you probably weren't able to, but in the chat, there were many messages of support and gratitude for you coming today and sharing that. So if you don't have a chance to read them, there are too many to read, but your story very clearly resonated with a lot of us today, and they're very appreciative for you sharing that. So thank you.
Thank you.
We do have some time for questions, and I know we've got employees, we've got community members, we've got students from our early college here. So now would be a time I'd like to invite everyone to put any questions you might have for Dr. Fields in the chat, and I will do my best to kind of moderate that and pull those out. One of the first comments we had was from a student as you were talking about some of the stress that you went through, and the comment was, we as students say we have stress, but look at what you guys went through. It kind of makes me feel like, why do I even have this stress? And that was Christian. And I wondered if you might speak to, I can understand when hearing your story, students might not see their stress in it, but I think young people today are confronted with a lot and differently than perhaps we were as we were growing up. And I wondered if you might have any thoughts about that and the stress that you see either with your students or with young people in general.
Yes, absolutely. And was that Christian that you said?
That was Christian, correct. Christian Chury.
Yes, Christian. So here's the thing. It's a different world. And I think perhaps one of the major differences is social media. Now, I am not someone who bashes all of social media. I think social media has its place and it can be absolutely wonderful if you engage in it intentionally. I think for a lot of young people, there's this this perception of perfection that comes from social media that is very debilitating for people. And let me tell you something, if you don't already know this, there's no such thing as a perfect person. I've never known anyone who was even close to being perfect in any way, shape, or form, including me, okay, especially me. The only entity that I know that comes even close to possibly being perfect is my Bernedoodle, and she's not a human. So I would imagine that if I had to grow up under that type of pressure, I would be incredibly hypercritical of myself. And I suspect that one of the advantages that I had is that I did not have that pressure. I had enough to deal with without trying to figure out if I had a filter, or it was just ridiculous. So in no way does the fact that I had this particular journey that was hard for me diminish how hard your journey was. Your journey is your journey, and we each have different journeys. And so I certainly respect that. And with my students, they flock to me like little, it is amazing. I miss teaching in person. I do as much as I can on Zoom, but even on Zoom, they're like little duckies, and they come in because they can sense that I see them. And so they share things with me, and people are like really afraid. I did not have that level of fear. And I can't imagine how difficult it would be to negotiate life when you're that fearful. So please, I don't want you to take from this the fact that you shouldn't be worried. That's another worry. See how you just sort of layer that on yourself like a little sandwich? Don't do that. Draw people close to you who recognize how unique and great you are, and then no one is perfect, and who will encourage you to continue. That's what I'd say.
Great, thank you so much. Another question from Carly Belaires. She'd like to hear your thoughts on how you stay present during those times of struggle.
Yeah. Well, I encourage myself to just be. So if I need to cry, I allow myself to cry. I don't try to stifle it because of some strange belief that I shouldn't cry. I don't know where that comes from. I mean, there's a reason why we have tear ducts, and I mean, there are biological reasons, but it also allows us to express ourselves. And it typically I feel much better after I cry. I don't know about other people, but I do. I feel like I've released something. Sometimes I scare that Bernedoodle that I mentioned because she doesn't know what to do, but I allow myself to do that. And I try to be very deliberate about not running away from it. And that's hard. Sometimes, depending on what it is, it's just heavy. But because I've had so many years of my life when I've had to do that, and I've come out better for it, the more you do it, it's like a muscle that gets used. It gets stronger and it's easier to do. In theory, it's like meditation. Now, I can't calm my mind down for more than about 5 seconds to meditate. I'm working on it. I got up to 5, so I'm impressed. But I would imagine it's like that. So that's what I try to stay very present in it. And even to the point where I don't move on to something else, because that's a way of distracting yourself, right? So that's just something that I do. And after some time, I allow myself to engage in some form of beauty or creativity. And I'm not a naturally very creative. Well, I am pretty creative, but I'm not good at drawing things. I'm an amazing colorer. Yes, I have about 100 coloring books. And so it's very wonderful for me to just sort of get lost in patterns and things like that. So find out what that is for you. It's very helpful.
I think we've all seen today art in many forms can be an outlet for some of that. So that's great advice. Thank you. The next question is from one of my colleagues, Dr. Beverly Brown. She'd like to know what you're reading, what you read most recently that was nonfiction, and what drew you to that book or books?
Wow. Okay. So, oh my gosh, what is the name of this book? I think one of them is called Joy. I think it's called Joy. And I just read it. Why can't I remember the title of it? I think it is called Joy. It's got different colored polka dots on front. And it's a book about how we manifest what we find. It's like, it's empirically based on what we find joyful. So things like color, is very joyful for us. Harmony is joyful. Abundance is joyful. And then she looks at why that is. So that's one. I read multiple books simultaneously. I'm also reading Caste by Isabel Wilkerson. It is absolutely phenomenal. And I'm reading that because of the times that we're in. I try to keep myself present and aware of what's going on. She also wrote The Warmth of Other Suns, which is absolutely phenomenal. And I read that a few years ago. And so I'm reading that. And then I also always read fiction, because research has proven that when you read fiction, it actually helps your brain process information better, because different elements of your brain get stimulated in fiction to create the story than it does in nonfiction. So I know people like my husband who says, oh, I don't read fiction books, blah, 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 whatever. I read fiction on purpose because it allows me to escape, and also because it's like a vitamin for my brain. So I'm reading about 3 books right now.
Excellent. Sound advice. I think people, there are several comments. I think people are seeing the books behind you, and so they're wondering what's on those bookshelves behind you. So
oh, this is just a few. I probably got several thousand books in my house. Yeah.
Great. Let's see. Our next question, unfortunately, I can't read the name because of the space on the screen, but the question is really talking about how we get enveloped in our own life and that internal sort of focus. And the question is, what advice do you give to us to help us be more empathetic? What can we do to be intentional about making empathy something we realize in our lives?
Oh, I appreciate that question. I think that when you have experienced a lot of pain, it can make you do one of 2 things. It can either make you someone who is less sensitive to the power of inflicting pain, or it can make you someone who's much more prone to recognizing pain. So I always leaned into that. I try to be empathetic because I remember when I didn't get empathy, and it does not feel good, and it's not helpful. And I don't believe that as human beings that should be natural for us. We should naturally be inclined to be concerned for others. Now, what the research refers to is that, and I mean, there's nothing we can do about it right now. We're in a pandemic, but that empathy is diminished through increased use of screens. So the more we're behind a computer screen or phone screen, the easier. That's why some of the rhetoric that you see online is so vicious. Like, what are you talking about? What do you mean? Why would you tell someone to kill? I mean, I don't even understand that, right? Like, I can understand you don't agree, but like, why would you tell them to go kill themselves? Who does that, right? Bernedoodles don't do that. I can tell you that, okay? But I think the fact that people have the screen, it allows you to maybe go to a darker place if you're so inclined. And so what I would encourage people to do is to connect to people outside of the screens. One of the things that I've done recently that is a hit, take the idea and spread it, is I go to Target, and it's not a plug for Target. They give me nothing but debt, okay? But I buy cards, and I pick people who are friends of mine or who I just think something, and I handwrite them a card. Now, admittedly, in this environment, some of them haven't gotten their cards for 6 weeks, and I am not kidding. That is ridiculous. It's a freaking card. I even have extra postage on it. But when they get it and they open it, people are like, whoa, this is beautiful. It's a beautiful card, and you say something just really nice, and it's just a different way to connect to people. And the phone, you can actually just call people and talk to them too. So I would encourage you to find different ways. And if you have an animal, rub that animal every day. If you don't have an animal, go find somebody with an animal and socially distance and rub that puppy, right? Because they will help you connect.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, and that's definitely a theme from this week of discussion. Is a lot of people have talked about connection and how we've become disconnected from one another, and the pandemic has only exacerbated kind of those conditions. So I think your advice is very timely. So thank you for that. There is a message of support for your dog as well in the chat that somebody is apparently. What kind of dog is it?
She is a tricolor Bernedoodle. Trust me, she is living her best life. Okay.
What is the Bern part of the Bernedoodle
Well,
mix there?
her dad is a Bernese Mountain Dog, and her mom is a Giant Poodle. Yeah.
Okay. So we have time for just a few more questions. I actually had one that I wanted to ask you. It's very rare where we have teachers and students together in the same sort of capacity with one another. And so I'd just be curious, as an educator and somebody who works with young people, what advice do you have for us, and what should we be doing, and kind of what should our students be doing to move forward and to begin to continue to address some of the issues and challenges we're facing?
Oh, wow. Dialogue is so incredibly important. And I think the concept of humility is really critical in this time, because humility allows for you to not assume that you know everything. There's a thing called the Dunning-Kruger Effect, which basically says that people who don't know a lot assume that they do. And the people who actually know quite a bit know enough to know they can't possibly know everything, right? So they'll say, okay, now this is just what I know, and they'll give you all these caveats, right? Even though they know quite a bit. And so I think that when we're interacting with each other, being humble and then honoring the humanity of the person that you're interacting with is really key. If you can remember those two things, you can dialogue about a lot of things. And I'm a big believer that you can communicate almost anything if your intention is right. Now, I can't figure out whether or not you have honest intentions. And that's something that drives me crazy when people say, well, her heart was in the right place. You don't know. You don't know where her heart was. You don't know where your heart is, possibly, right? And so when you are truly coming from that place, you can communicate to people in a way that allows them to hear you and where you're able to hear them. Epictetus also said that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, so we should listen twice as much as we speak. I'm a big fan of that. And that is incredibly attractive when you actually do run into someone who listens and doesn't say, I'm sorry to interrupt, but, and then they interrupt you. Just those things I think are really important. And look, as a professor, I think one of the reasons why I connect so deeply to my students is the fact that I don't pretend like I know everything. I learn something every class that I teach, more than one thing. And I also treat them with respect and as people. And I will tell you, I have consistently gotten feedback from my students that they're shocked that a professor talks to them like they're not stupid and useless. And that very often their professors don't even speak to them. I don't even understand that. Why in the world would you want to go to a class and talk for 3 hours yourself? It's like a soliloquy. So as long as you're interacting and connecting with people and honestly paying attention to them, which people can tell, okay? They can tell when you're blowing them off, then that means a lot. And for all you know, what I've learned is you may be the only person in their life who's doing that, which is sad, but it gives you this tremendous level of influence that instead of trying to take advantage of, you respect. So that's what I would say.
That's great. Yeah, you can't underestimate those relationships sometimes. So,
yeah.
We've got a lot of questions, but I'm going to take 2 more. The first is from Adedoyan, who was one of the first student speakers, and she wanted to kind of follow up on the question on empathy and intentional sort of empathy. And she's looking for, as we continue to deal with the pandemic and as we continue to be physically separated from one another, do you have any advice about maintaining connection and empathy when we can't get together, when we can't be together?
Yeah. I think it's really important to still stay connected to people. And so wherever possible, when you can, because there are situations where we do leave. So you might go to CVS, or you might go, sorry, I don't go a lot of places.
We're in the same boat there.
Right? So when you are out, make eye contact. Now we should be wearing our masks, right? But those eyes, boy, do they still say a lot. Oh my goodness. So make eye contact with people. Be polite with people. If you see someone and they're struggling, there are a lot of really angry, frustrated people for lots of reasons. try to leave some light there. It is, again, not to sound like a nerd, though I am one, research has proven that when you do that, when you sow into other people, not only does it help that person, it helps you. And so that's a really easy thing to do. Sometimes even in this space of distance, if you could just, you know, I'm someone, I mean, I know people are still going through drive-throughs. I know I am. Not quite as much, but I am. Pay for the meal behind you. Send those notes like I mentioned. So there are ways that you can still connect to people. If there are possible ways to volunteer, and that's shifted some, if you can still do that, do that. Like suit up and do it. You don't have to do it for an extended period of time, but you'll be helping people. There's still people who are hungry. You'd be alarmed at how many people are hungry in this time. So there's so many things you can do. Just set a level of intentionality to see it.
Absolutely. I realized very early on when we needed to wear masks that I use my smile as a way to greet people. And I didn't realize how much I was dependent on my smile. And so now in the mask culture of the pandemic, I've adopted a tick that drives my wife nuts, which is winking. And she says it's awful and is encouraging me to stop it. But
here's the thing. If it's a legitimate smile, you can still see it because your eyes crinkle. Now, stay away from those weirdo people who smile at the bottom, but there's not smiling at the top. But you can still smile. Winking is cool, but you might be problematic.
I'm not sure it's cool. I appreciate you saying that, but I'm working on reining it in. So we have one last question from Lena Gerchek, and I think it's a good way to kind of bring our conversation to a close. Her question is really, what daily activities have you established to help keep focus and being present and engaged as a part of your life, as a part of your routine?
Oh, it's such a cool question. Yo, I got some stuff, okay? I color often. I don't get to color every day. Yesterday I had 8 meetings. So some days I just barely have time to eat. But I do incorporate coloring fairly often. I also do this thing called visual journaling. And I keep track of my meetings and the things that I need to do. And it's just something I came up with. But when I was a child, one of the things that brought me tremendous joy in a really rough scenario were stickers. I know it sounds crazy, but Michael's has like 4.7 million stickers at any time. And so I visually journal with stickers. I love it. It forces me to look at my schedule. And so I'm like an adult and a kid at the same time. It is so cool. So I do that. I take time in the morning, every morning. There's this book called A 5-Minute Journal. Literally, it takes 5 minutes. You could get it on Amazon or wherever, but it doesn't matter. You could take 5 minutes to talk about what you're grateful for and what you're looking forward to. I read devotionals. I light a candle. I have a favorite candle. And so I like that. And I try to do those things every single day. And of course, the Bernedoodle rubs help. So I think find a couple things that just make you feel good, that aren't heavy lifts. You know, some people say, oh, my thing is working out 12 hours a day. That's not mine. So if that brings you joy, make sure you do it. But that's self-care, right? I also am very cognizant of allowing stress to stay in myself. So I have stressful situations just like anybody else does, but I literally will like blow a deep breath out to exhale that when I'm done so I can move on. So you're not carrying all that stuff into the rest of your day and contaminating other interactions.
Yeah, clearly working out 12 hours a day is not my stress relief mechanism either. So but I think if I hear you that it's really about doing something intentionally, whatever that is for you, that's going to bring you that peace. It's going to keep you in the moment. And so I think that's a great way to end our conversation. Dr. Fields, I can't thank you enough for being here today. I've so enjoyed talking to you, and too many messages to read. Just thanking you for sharing your story and the inspiration of it, and truly had an impact. And I hope you take that away. people feel very grateful for having you here today. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Well, as we bring that to a close, and as we close the day, I want to thank everyone for being here today. I want to thank all our student contributors. I want to thank everyone who helped pull this together. And as we close, I want to kind of circle back to our student participants and our student leaders, because I think if you reflect, and this will be recorded and you can watch it again, if you reflect on what they're talking about, there's some lessons in there for all of us. And Etta Doyen, in her poem, she rejects the idea of patience, that the ask of patience is no longer acceptable. And I think that's a very important point that she's making there, that the time for patience maybe was never appropriate, but currently there is no room for patience. And so as we close, this is the end of a week of ceremony. It's the end of a week of recognition. But I do want to leave everyone with the sense that this is the beginning of a new year of action. And so I want to leave you all with a call to action as you leave, whether you're students or whether you're my colleagues at the school. We're all going to be off on Monday. Enjoy the day off. It's nice to have a day off. Students, you won't have to go to school. But my call to action for all of you is to make sure, as we've talked about intention, take some time on Monday and reflect. Make a plan. What do you want to get done? And I'll close with this from Kylie. What can I do to make a difference? The conversation cannot stop here. So on Monday, as you're away from work and you're away from school, please make some time to think about and make a plan for what you can do to make a difference. So we can, next year when we come back, we can answer Kylie's question and we can tell her what we did this past year and celebrate those accomplishments as well. So the work is in front of us, not behind us, as we close today. So I want to thank everyone for being here, and this will bring the convocation to a close. Thank you so much, and have a great weekend.